Ben Gregg's been working out with NBA teams. What does he need to do to earn his way into the league next season?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first bet at FanDuel wins. Check it out, one of our sponsors here today. All right, folks, the Pacers have forced a Game 7. We're going to talk about that to close out the show. Tremendous performance from Andrew Nembhard, what it means for the NBA Finals. But today is focused on Ben Gregg as we close out our NBA Draft Preview Series, talking about the four Gonzaga seniors who are in the conversation to be selected in the NBA draft. That's, of course, Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Caleb Battle, and now Ben Gregg. So we're going to talk about his career, his recent NBA workouts, some strengths and weaknesses he has as an NBA draft prospect, and we're going to project his professional future. We'll start with the history here for Ben Gregg, and we're not going to get into all of it every single season. For those of you who do want more of a comprehensive history on Ben Gregg, we did do a player review season in review episodes after the season. So I know we did one on Ben Gregg about 2-3 months ago or so. So you can check that out if you have not. It is in your feed, or if you're on YouTube, there's a playlist with all of those episodes. We'll give you a quick recap on Ben Gregg's career. He's a four-star power forward from Clackamas High School in Oregon, just outside the top 100 in his recruiting class. He committed to Gonzaga pretty quickly after he was offered from Gonzaga. It was a program he always wanted to go. He's had family in Spokane. He rooted for the Zags his entire life growing up. So once he got that offer, it was fairly obvious he was going to come to Gonzaga. And in fact, he joined a semester early. During that 2020-21 season, when Gonzaga went to the national championship game and lost to Baylor, he was in the title game. He appeared and played minutes in the title game when he should have still been a high school senior. Very cool opportunity that Ben got to be able to do that. And then he started his Gonzaga career right before that, and then he continued for the next 4 years. All told, played 141 games in a Gonzaga basketball uniform, started 39 of them, played about 15 minutes per game. That's just for his career, where he averaged about 6 points, 4 boards, and 1 assist per game. In his career total, he shot 67% on two-pointers, 34% from three, 74% from the free throw line. But it was really the last 2 seasons where Ben kind of developed into the player that we knew he was. He played very sparingly early in his career and then kind of carved out a role in his 3rd season. And then his 4th and 5th seasons is when he was a part-time starter, but a full-time significant part of Gonzaga's rotation. In the last 2 seasons combined, Ben played about 22 minutes per game, averaged 9 points, little over 5 boards, little over 1 assist per game, shot 73.1% on two-pointers, which is just an unfathomable level of efficiency offensively. Also shot 33.5% on threes, 76% from the free throw line. Last year, he led the WCC in 2-point field goal percentage when he was also 10th nationally in 2-point field goal percentage. He's also top 25 in WCC history in both offensive box plus minus and defensive box plus minus, meaning he was one of the more efficient offensive and defensive players literally in WCC history, according to some of the advanced analytics. After the season, while Caleb Battle and Nolan Hickman got invited to the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament and Ryan Nembhard got invited to the G League Elite Camp, which he parlayed into an invitation of the NBA Draft Combine, Ben Gregg did not get any of those invitations. He did, however, enter his name into the transfer portal, which caused a little bit of a kerfuffle. He did this along with many other graduating seniors. Ian Shefflin from Clemson, Jaden Zachary from Clemson were 2 of the more notable ones. Zakai Ziegler from Tennessee is perhaps the most notable one here because he is the one who filed a lawsuit with the NCAA arguing that he should get a 5th year of eligibility. The reasoning was fairly weak in the argument. It was basically, if I had redshirted a year, I would have potentially still gotten paid NIL deals while redshirting, and I would have a 5th year. So you should give me a 5th year. It's obviously more complicated than that, but there wasn't a super strong basis for getting a 5th year other than the guys before me got a 5th year because of COVID. So now I want a 5th year and Ziegler argued, like, I will make $2 to $4 million playing in college basketball next year if I get an extra year. Unfortunately, there wasn't, again, a strong enough reason. The NCAA argued that Ziegler is trying to become the first player to get a 5th year, quote, as a right, which I thought was a compelling way to make that argument of, like, he just expects that he should get a 5th year, and our rules say no. He had requested what would be a preliminary injunction, which would effectively mean that the courts would say, hey, while this court case is still happening, we will grant you the ability to play college basketball next year. This is what happened to the 2-time waivers. There are 2-time transfers, by the way, when Efton Reed, and we'll use him as the example because he's a Gonzaga guy, when he was at Wake Forest and he was sitting out that year because he'd already transferred from LSU to Gonzaga and then Gonzaga to Wake Forest. And at the time you had to sit out if you were a 2-time transfer. Suddenly a preliminary injunction was granted and he was immediately eligible for Wake Forest. That's what Ziegler was hoping with this transfer, with this rule for a 5th year. It's why Ben Gregg entered the portal, just in case he was given an extra year of eligibility. Ziegler's preliminary injunction was denied, which almost certainly means that these other players, including Ben Gregg, will not be granted a waiver to have a 5th year of eligibility. So if you were thinking there's a chance that Ben Gregg will have eligibility to play college basketball again next year, it was always very slim, and now I think it is barely over 0.0% chance that it's going to happen. So for Gregg, he finishes his college basketball career at Gonzaga. He has a tremendous senior season, with the exception of the 3-point shooting, which we will talk about in the strengths and weaknesses section here. But without the invitations to Portsmouth or the elite camp or anything like that, he's only been able to showcase his NBA skills in front of scouts and analysts and coaches and people of that nature through workouts, which we know he's had at least 3 workouts. He's probably had more than that. But we know that he has worked out with the Clippers, the Mavericks, and the Blazers. We know this because the Blazers announced that Ben Gregg was working out with the team, along with a handful of other unlikely to be drafted players. Caleb Grill from Missouri is probably the most notable player on that list. Damari Monsanto from UTSA. There's a couple others as well, but not really guys that are expected to be drafted. But the Blazers did announce this, so it's very cool for Ben to get a chance to work out with his hometown team, the team he grew up rooting for in Clackamas, Oregon. And the Clippers and Mavericks, we know about that because Ben's father, Matt Gregg, who's the athletic director at Warner Pacific, an NAIA school in Portland, he posted, as he always does, he posts about his son a lot on social media, on Twitter in particular, and he posted a picture of Ben's workouts from the Clippers and the Mavericks, or at least pictures of his gear from those 2 workouts. But from what he implied, it sure seems like Ben has had more than these 3 workouts. In fact, he's probably worked out with 10 plus different NBA teams. It's just speculation on my part. Caleb Battle was hoping to work out with more than 15 teams. So these guys are getting lots of opportunities. And as I've said before, these teams do not have to report these workouts. They usually don't. So it's not something that we're going to be all that privy to necessarily, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ben has been working out with quite a few different teams in the NBA leading up to the draft. What does he need to do in those workouts? We're going to get to that. We're going to talk about his strengths and weaknesses, because if we're being honest, Ben's professional career will almost certainly be dictated by his ability to shoot the 3. So we're going to get into that and more coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA Finals have been incredible. Game 7 coming up in a couple of days. First time in nearly a decade. Every single night of this event has delivered highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts. We've been seeing that for sure, and can't miss moments, whether it's a game-winning shot like we got in Game 1, a breakout player like Jalen Williams or Pascal Siakam. There's never been a better time than right now to get in on all the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live during the contest. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Game 7 coming up on Sunday. Thunder are 8-point favorites at FanDuel right now at home, and they're minus 300 on the money line. If you want to get in on that action, have a vested interest in watching Game 7, then check it out. And if you're new to FanDuel, now's the perfect time to sign up, because if you head to FanDuel now and place your first $5 bet, if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still going through our fourth and final NBA draft preview episode here on Locked On Zags as we get folks ready for the 4 Gonzaga players who could, might, should, maybe will get drafted in a week when the draft starts on June 25th, and then the second round the next day, June 26th. Talking Ben Gregg today, we're talking strengths and weaknesses. We'll start with the strengths. He's got good size. And I think it's unfortunate that because we saw Hickman in battle at Portsmouth and because we saw Nembhard at the Combine and the G League Elite Camp, we have measurements for those guys. We know how tall they measured in shoes, without shoes. We know their wingspan, their jumping, height, weight, things like that. We don't really have that for Ben Gregg. I tried to see if we could find a place where it exists. He's listed on this team website at 6'10", 225. So it's about the best that we have to go on. We know that listed heights on websites tends to be with shoes on, and they're measured at the Combine in particular without shoes on. So I'm going to guess that Ben Gregg probably measures more like 6'9", maybe even like 6'8.7", something like that. But regardless, just looking at him eyeball-wise, you can tell that he has the requisite size to be an NBA front court player. He's big, he's strong, he's filled out his body muscular wise significantly since he got to campus when he was very young when he got to campus, but he still had a little bit of that kind of baby size on him, and he has absolutely filled out and gotten much, much stronger throughout his career. I think his size is a positive for him as he looks towards an NBA career. Other strengths for Ben Gregg, he's just a winner. He's a winning basketball player. He finds ways to positively impact the game on both sides of the ball. Again, the fact that his box plus minus offensively and defensively are so overwhelmingly positive. Like, he is continually doing things on the court that impact winning in a positive way. He's a hustle guy. He dives for loose balls. He gobbles up offensive rebounds. He's tenacious and physical and battles on the defensive end of the floor. It's the kind of guy that NBA teams like having on the end of their bench, because you know he's going to give you a ton of energy. He's going to give you a ton of heart, and he's going to do the little things that maybe other players, guys at his position might not want to do or be as good at doing at that level. For example, Gregg's 11.5% offensive rebound rate last season was third in the WCC. In other seasons where he didn't have enough to qualify because he didn't play enough minutes, there's 2 seasons in Ben's career where his offensive rebounding rate would have been the best in the entire conference. He just didn't play enough minutes to qualify for those rate stat in the record books. But he's a phenomenal offensive rebounder. We saw that a lot last year, constantly fighting for position. The amount of putbacks he got, grabbed an offensive rebound, immediately went back up with it. One of my favorite Ben Gregg plays, it felt like every game, or at least every other game, was an offensive rebound, put back, getting fouled, and hitting the bucket. It's just the most deflating thing for the other team, for the other team, when you force a missed shot, and instead of getting the rebound and getting out, you not only give up an offensive rebound, you give up an easy bucket, and you commit a foul, and you likely give up a third point, as Ben was a very strong free throw shooter. That's just the worst thing. You go from, hey, we didn't give up any points on this possession, to now we gave up 3 points and we committed a foul at the same time. Ben Gregg is also just an insanely efficient scorer. 73.3% on 2-point attempts as a junior, 72.9% on 2-point attempts as a senior. Literally almost 3/4 of his 2-point attempts in his final 2 seasons combined went in. A lot of this is shot selection. He's not taking a lot of long twos. He's not taking a lot of mid-range jumpers. He's not taking a lot of floaters or complicated, difficult 2-point shots. He's taking a lot of shots right at the rim. There's not, and this would fall more into the negative, there's not a ton of offensive versatility for Ben Gregg. He can shoot the 3, and he's got a little bit of a mid-range game. I mean, I think he could contribute in that area, but he didn't at Gonzaga. He didn't show that because he wasn't asked to do that. And I think that he filled his role admirably. The reason that percentage is so high is because he was focused on taking high percentage shots and was very good at knocking them down. But again, the range for Ben is there. I mean, he's 79% from the free throw line last year, 74% for his career. He's got good touch. He's got a good jump shot. And then the three-point shooting, I think, is something we consider a positive while acknowledging that it was not good last year. In 22-23, Ben Gregg shot 37.7% from three, which is great for a 6'9" big man. In the next season, 23-24, Ben Gregg also shot exactly 37.7% from three. In those two seasons, he made 63 threes combined. Again, a pretty good volume for a big man. 2 consecutive seasons with a decent volume of three-point attempts to shoot nearly 38%. That is great. Unfortunately, his final season at Gonzaga, that percentage dropped to 27.1%. He went 19 of 70 last year from beyond the arc. However, here's the split for that. In the first 16 games of the season last year, Ben shot 6 of 34 from three, which is 17.6%. In the final 19 games, Ben shot 13 of 36, which is 36%. So for the second half of the season, he was basically right around where he'd been the previous 2 years, 36, 37, 38%. But in the first 16 games, when Gonzaga was adjusting to a new team, when he was adjusting to a new role with Michael Ajayi on the team, I'm not saying that there's a like obvious excuse. He just was in a really nasty slump for the first 16 games of the season. But the idea that Ben was a terrible shooter all season last year isn't entirely accurate. He was a terrible three-point shooter for the first half of the year. And in the second half, he shot it about as efficiently as he had in his previous 2 seasons. Still, scouts are going to utilize his lack of three-point shooting last year as a kind of argument against him of like, how confident are we in this kid's ability to shoot the three? Because if he's not a three-point shooter, if he's not a floor spacer, he doesn't have a lot of utility at the next level. There are other things Ben does well. He makes good decisions with the basketball. He's never been much of a passer, but his turnover rate is consistently excellent. In fact, in 23-24, his turnover rate of 9.6% was the 5th lowest in the WCC and the lowest on Gonzaga's roster. Again, pretty consistently was one of the best turnover rates among high usage players in the WCC. He's also a tough defender. He works hard defending on the perimeter. He works hard defending on the block. It's kind of hard to see some of that translating to the NBA, but he is a hardworking defender. And I think all of this is kind of encapsulated by the fact that he's used to being a role player. And I think there's a value to that in the NBA that maybe we don't talk about a lot, is you expect the best players, the highest scorers, to be the guys who make the NBA. But sometimes being used to and being able to play a role in college more similar to the role you're going to play in the NBA does have value. Certainly you can quantify Ben that way. Looking at the weaknesses for Ben, without testing numbers, we don't know the athletic testing. We don't know his sprint speed, his wingspan, the measurements and the testing, but I think it's fairly safe to make the assumption that Ben would test out as a below average NBA athlete. I don't think Ben's a bad athlete, but there's a difference between being a good athlete and a good NBA athlete. I don't think Ben is there. I think his height is probably an advantage for him. But again, if his wingspan is significantly bigger than his height, that's going to potentially give him some advantage. But if it's not, that's going to hurt him. And I just don't see the jumping and the running and the sprinting as being positives for Ben, just based on what I've seen from him. And then weaknesses, moving laterally to defend on switches, it's just likely not going to be a strength. Like we said, he's a tough defender, and he's a good on-ball defensive player. He's a good on-ball perimeter defender, and he's a good on-ball defender in the paint. But getting switched, getting asked to defend guards away from the rim, move laterally in pick-and-roll situations, I'd be fairly surprised if he was above average at that, and it's just crucial in the modern NBA. You have to be able to do that. Drew Timme had far more of an offensive bag than Ben Gregg, and he's had a hard time finding his way into the NBA because of those lateral mobility issues defensively. If Ben has those same issues and does not have the offensive utility of Drew, it's hard to see him sticking. Many of Ben's positives that we just talked about, the hustle, the offensive rebounding, the physicality, the toughness, they're not nearly as impactful in the NBA if your athleticism doesn't hold up. Put more frankly, Ben Gregg's ability to out-physical guys he was defending in college and muscle them for offensive rebounds and finish through contact A lot of that he was successful at because he was in the WCC, or even just because he was in college, even against higher level college players. It's a different animal in the NBA, and I don't see a lot of the skills that he possesses translating to the NBA all that well. Obviously, we already talked about the outside shooting and the weakness being the dip that we saw from that last year. I think he'd find a way to impact the game offensively as a three-point shooter. If he got into the NBA or got a two-way contract and was just working on improving his game and was basically told, hey, your chances of actually being on a bench in the NBA are pretty much entirely predicated on your three-point shooting, which they are. That is what the feedback will be for Ben, and he's no longer in school, and he's just working on that three-point shot, and spacing is better in the NBA. I think that he will get better at that. But do scouts trust him enough to give him a spot right now? That is the question. Hard for me to say at this point. We also know Ben plays hard on defense. He doesn't generate a ton of steals or blocks. He's just not much of a rim protector. He's never been a rim protector. He's a decent on-ball defender, but I don't know that we saw a lot of help side presence from Ben. That's another skill that I think NBA teams would really like to see from him that I just don't think he really possessed or showed all that much in college. And then, again, we mentioned the role situation for Ben, and I think that makes some sense. But he also is an older prospect who never had a starting role. He's an older prospect who started 39 games and was on the bench for 102 games while he was in college. I think ultimately, while the role argument makes some sense in a positive way, I think ultimately the fact that he was a role player who mostly played under 20 minutes per game is probably going to be used against him by NBA scouts and front offices. Well, Ben Gregg is not projected to be drafted next week, but here's how he could force his way into a two-way contract, that and more, coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, closing out the show, continuing our conversation about Ben Gregg's NBA draft profile as we are a week away, not even, less than a week away from the NBA draft. Again, the first round is on Wednesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, the second round the next day, Thursday, also at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Wouldn't necessarily make appointment television for the first round if you're just tracking the Zags. I don't think Ryan, is going to sneak into that first round, but the second round might be worth watching to see if Nembhard or any of these others end up getting drafted, or at least where they sign when the draft is over, which usually there tends to be a flurry of movement right when the draft ends. For Ben, the draft range, there's not a draft range for Ben Gregg. He's not showing up on mock drafts. It's not happening for him, and it's very, very unlikely that he's going to get drafted. It's not trying to be mean to Ben or anything like that, but I have not seen a single mock draft that has had him on there, and when I see big boards that sometimes go as many as 100 deep, it's pretty rare to see him on there. I have seen Caleb Battle on big boards. I have seen Nolan Hickman on big boards. I don't think that I have ever seen Ben Gregg on a big board. Without getting invitations to the Portsmouth Invitational or the G League Elite Camp or the Combine, all of that paints a picture of a player who is getting attention from NBA scouts and front offices in the sense that he's getting those team workouts, but he is not getting a lot of attention as a potential draft pick. More so, hey, is this a guy we want to invite to Summer League? Is this a guy we want to bring to training camp potentially? Is this a guy we want to have on our G League roster so we can get a longer look at him next year, but not necessarily a guy we're envisioning using one of our picks on when the draft rolls around. In terms of team fits, again, I think at this point, a player like this is just, he's not put in a box where it's like only certain types of teams are going to want him or utilize him. He possesses skills that could be valuable in the NBA, and you just kind of want to get a look at him and see if he can do enough of the things that are weaknesses, like defend and switch and stuff like that, to make him a viable NBA player. I don't think it's like, oh, this team wouldn't want him because they have this, or this team. Like that's not really a factor for Ben at this point. I think teams that need shooting are certainly going to be more likely to give him a look. Teams that have depth issues in the front court are probably more likely to give him a look, but I don't think he's really pigeonholed to certain NBA teams the way that a prospect who's more likely to get drafted might be. Likely outcome from Ben Gregg, fairly simple. He's not going to get drafted, but he's probably going to catch on in Summer League somewhere. I would be surprised if he didn't. I think the draft is going to finish. 59th player is going to be selected, and then we'll have a flurry of movement. We'll hear about so-and-so player signing a two-way deal, so-and-so player signing an Exhibit 10 contract, so-and-so player getting invited to Summer League. There's going to be a flurry of headlines. I suspect, if you've been following these episodes, that Ryan will be selected in the draft. somewhere in the 40s would be my guess. And then after the draft, we will find out about Battle, Hickman, and Gregg, where they're getting signed, where they're going to play in Summer League. After that for Ben, I'd be surprised if he ends up on a two-way deal. And there's only so many two-way deals to go around. I don't think Ben necessarily ends up with a two-way contract. I think Caliph could. I think Nolan maybe could. I think it's a little less likely for him too. But if I was a betting man and I was betting on this, I'd say Nembhard ends up on either a two-way or just a standard NBA contract. Caliph would be my next likeliest, followed by Nolan, and then there's a fairly big gap before you get to Ben. I just think that Ben would have to be absolutely lights out, scorching hot in Summer League, and he'd have to prove it defensively. Like, even if he shot it really well from three in Summer League, if he's also going to have to show, like, hey, the athleticism, the physicality, the movement, laterally, the mobility, those things look better than we're expecting them to look. Otherwise, I just don't think a team is willing to put him on a two-way contract. I think they're more likely to invite him to potentially a training camp to let him compete and then throw him on their G League roster and see what he can do there. And from that point, Ben then has a choice. Does he want to play in the G League? Does he want to go overseas where he could probably make good money as well? What are the opportunities for him? We did comps for like Nolan Hickman, which were easier. Rasir Bolton, Malachi Smith are fairly similar players. There's not as many obvious comparisons for Gregg. Like, he's not quite Anton Watson athletically. And Anton, of course, snuck in on a two-way contract and played a few NBA games last year. He's better than like a Jeremy Jones, who kind of filled the same role, but Ben was more valuable and more impactful for Gonzaga than Jeremy Jones was. Maybe you look at like Killian Tilly or Jonathan Williams, but Ben wasn't as good as either of those guys. Those guys did make the NBA, but they just sniffed it. I think Williams played 7 NBA games. Killian Tilly played like 18 NBA games. Like, those guys barely made it. So to me, that kind of points to Ben being a G League guy or an overseas guy and unlikely to be an NBA guy, which is okay. He had a tremendous college basketball career, and if he gets a chance to compete for an NBA spot in Summer League, that's still an awesome opportunity for him. And who knows, maybe he could do enough there to make some noise. Speaking of making noise, the Indiana Pacers, 108-91 win and 91 win over Oklahoma City in Game 6 of the NBA Finals on Thursday. That means we will have a Game 7, and it is in part so much to what Andrew Nembhard did in that Game 6. 17 points for him, 4 assists, 3 steals, 2 of 2 on his 2-point attempts, 3 of 5 from 3, 4 of 4 from the charity stripe. He had an incredible no-look pass to Miles Turner for a dunk in the third quarter. He had back-to-back threes and at one point scored 8 straight points for the Pacers, a monster game for Andrew Nembhard to help force this Game 7. Meanwhile, not a great game for Chet Holmgren, just 4 points for him, 6 boards and a pair of turnovers. He's only 2 of 6 on his 2-point attempts. He was 0 of 3 from 3 in those 24 minutes. Interestingly, he was minus 11 in the box score, which was actually the best among the starters. Chet always seems to have a not as bad of an impact on a game as you might expect because of his rim presence and his length and his defense, but there's not really any way to spin this as a positive for Chet. It was not a good game for him. It just was an arguably worse game. I think Jalen Williams was minus 40 in this game, for example. I'm not trying to pick on him, but that's just a huge difference between what he put up. I think Isaiah Hartenstein was minus 12, and he played like half as many minutes as Chet Holmgren. Just wild to see what that box score looked like. Game 7 will be on Sunday, June 22nd, 5 p.m. Pacific time. It'll be on ABC. FanDuel has it Oklahoma City minus 8. They are minus 300 on the money line. This is the first Game 7 in the NBA Finals since 2016. It has been nearly a decade. I am so excited. This is going to be a phenomenal game. How much better can it get? Game 7 NBA Finals, scrappy underdog team, a juggernaut team, 2 Zags playing in it. You got the jerseys behind you on YouTube. This is about as good as it gets. I cannot wait. We'll have plenty of recaps about Game 7, the legacy of Nembhard and Holmgren, the legacy of Gonzaga players in the NBA, all coming up next week. And we'll have some NBA draft coverage as well as that's rolling around. And hopefully, we'll have some media day stuff to talk about. It's been a little slow on Locked On Zags, but I think next week's going to be packed with NBA Finals, with NBA draft, with Pac-12 media deals, with Pac-12 expansion. Maybe we'll finally get the confirmation on Mario St. Perry committing to the roster. I expect all of those things to happen next week, so it should be a real fun, jam-packed week on Locked On Zags. But that is going to wrap it up for this week here on the show. I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Hope you all have a fantastic, enjoyable weekend, and we'll be back next week with all sorts of fun stuff. Until then, though, as always, go Zags.